Brothers, this morning the topic for about an hour and a half is Ubuntu and Islam. Brother Abdullah Sfiso Brian Duma is giving the lecture, and if not many of you know who he is, he's born to a Christian family. He grew up as a Christian. He has studied at Assalam for 5 years. He is self-taught in his dawah and his comparative religion, and taught himself Arabic to read and write and speak. The talk that he's given you, some part of it was given to His Majesty, the reigning monarch of the Zulu nation, King Gudru Zeletini, by Brother Abdullah. Ubuntu, the topic that he's going to talk about is extremely important if you want to do dawah in Africa, especially the southern part of Africa. The concept of Ubuntu he's going to talk about is relevant to the Amangoni people, or to the Nguni tribes below the Zambezi River, this part of southern Africa. I think this talk is very, very important, and you will hear things that it will be so surprising, inshallah. Jazakallah. Please pay full attention.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله الذي أرسله بالحق بشيرا ونذيرا. MashaAllah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, as you heard the introduction, I think it was huge and bigger than me, but Alhamdulillah. So inshallah, I hope to make it also very interesting, since Muhammad Khan has made it so enticing to even wait for it, inshallah Tabarak wa Ta'ala. So what I will basically share is I would say my slight research on our African culture, especially from the Zulu background that I come from, with relation to Islam. And of course, instead of saying Isintu or Zulu tradition, but I use the term Ubuntu. The reason behind that is the fact that Ubuntu is a concept of life, is a concept of living, and it's not just a term and then maybe a tribe, which means it can apply to as many tribes as you can find. As much as you can find it within the Sutras, they say Boto, and you find it even with the Xhosas, they say Ubuntu as well, so which is actually a concept of living. Now, my own understanding of it, or my own searching on it, I realized that somehow, in some sense or another, this concept is a concept of living that has been introduced in some sense or another before, or in the past. Now, in my own discretion, I see it as a work of a certain prophet who was sent, because the Quran tells us very clearly that every nation, Allah, if not a language, He sent a prophet to them, or a messenger to them. And how can we tell that? So this is what basically I'll try and show you among the living traditions that we find among the Zulu people, and yet at the same time we find, interestingly enough, Islam still keeps them as they are, which is something that I hope it should benefit each one of us, inshallah, in some sense or another. Like one example, there's one saying, I think by a man named John Beatty, if I'm not mistaken, where he said, "No one shows an African child the supreme being," which means that among the African people, they are already familiar with the existence of the supreme being. Which means that even you, as an inviter to Islam, at the back of your head, you should know when you're inviting a person of an African background, among other backgrounds of course, but this is basically what I want you to take home, that you are talking to someone who already knows there's a supreme being. Which means that you are not talking to someone who is ignorant or an atheistic person. Because by virtue of our traditions, the name of God, as you can see on the screen, Umvelingangi, has always survived throughout time. Mind you, our people were not writers, which means they never had any form of writing whatsoever. But they managed to impart the knowledge of who the Almighty is by teaching through tales and through parables and through stories and so on and so forth. There's one tradition that I know of, that where the elderly person, whether the grandfather or the grandmother, when they have the bonfire and everyone is sitting there, then he starts telling stories. That is how knowledge was passed on in the African tradition. Of course, in some other civilization, they had a method of writing in some sense or another. But from the background that I come from, my understanding has been that most integral part of passing of information and knowledge has been through stories, storytelling, fairy tales and so on, but then because of the lesson will be carried out so that it's enticing as well for the children, then you'd find names like Umvelingang. If I can break it down very simply for you, the term Mveli within Zulu, which means someone who appeared. But it says Mveli Ngangi, that Ngangi at the end basically means someone who appeared before anything could be there, which means that he has been there before anything was, and he is responsible for making everything else to come after him, which means that they acknowledge Allah in the sense that he has always been there, and he is the reason behind every existence and every creation, which is amazing because you find that everyone among the Zulus, when you ask them who created the heavens and the earth, they don't have to be in church, they don't have to be in a mosque, in a synagogue or a temple, but they will tell you Unkulunkulu. If they still know their mother tongue, which is isiZulu, they will say Umvelingang. I did this presentation as well. I know for some people it's going to be very difficult to mimic this term, right? But inshallah, you'll learn. I went to Mpumalanga, I think it was December 2016. They speak Swati there, a language which is similar to Zulu in some sense or another. What was very interesting when I did this presentation, they said this very same term has been taught by our great-grandfathers, the term for God Almighty. Now, my deduction on that is if this one term came from a guy who just slept and woke up and said, you know what, I think we should call God this. It would have been impossible to have it so common among so many people. You understand? If it was a concept that people develop themselves from their own senses and thoughts, then we would have had a problem with that. Why? Because they would have taken it as anyhow that they deduct it. But the uniformity of the same term or of the same name tells us something. Tells us there was one person or one individual or one source that said this is how you address God or this is how you call the Supreme Being. Which means that people of that language would all of them succumb to this very same term to use and refer to God. Which is why among the Zulus, among the Swatis, they use the very same term. And Swaziland alike, and Mpumalanga has a good number of Swati-speaking people. But the term Velingang still remains like that. Which then gives us the evidence that someone was responsible for giving this kind of information. Right? One of the other aspects is that they do not assign any family to him because they're saying he's not born. There is one way that they explain. They say you can neither see him or you can never hear him, but you can see him through his works, which means you can see him through what he does for you and what happens throughout life. Which, alhamdulillah, is the very same concept we find in Islam. Because among the Arabic-speaking people, when Prophet Muhammad ﷺ spoke about Allah, they already knew who Allah is, isn't it? The only thing is they used other things to worship Allah, which means they created their own intermediaries. And among the Zulus, we also have that kind of an issue, where they put ancestors before Allah, which means that they're saying the ancestors are the ones who reach out to Allah. You understand? So which is that concept basically that is there, that actually contaminates the belief in the oneness of Allah, which they already have. They already believe in this. We need to understand that. Which means that it's there, they acknowledge Allah that is there, they acknowledge that He exists, and they acknowledge His majesty and magnificence and everything. But then whatever, most of the times we see this, it takes place throughout time. There will be one individual who proclaims a certain message. Once it becomes secondary information, and then it gets contaminated all throughout history. And that is how we can then try and help our people to come back to the primary stance of it. Because now, alhamdulillah, we have the Quran. The Quran, no one can adulterate it, no one can switch the information. Because one simple example I can give you of how the issue of ancestors was involved, or how the names of our forefathers started being mentioned, it wasn't like that before. It was in a sense that they used to say, Mvelingangi, Tito wawo, kokobetu, obani, 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 which means that God Almighty, who is the God of such and such individual, which means that if you know your lineage enough, and among the Arabs they are very good with that, you have Ibn all the way down, right? How they used to do it, they would say God of so and so and so and so. Throughout time though, people started removing Mvelingang as the main term, which means as the main one who is being addressed. Then they started addressing their forefathers, which means that now they went direct while it was an indirect mentioning of their names when they would say, like for instance, if you read the Bible, you will find that it says God of Abraham, God of Isaac and Jacob and so on. You understand? That very same method was a method that was there until some people decided not to mention the name of God. I wouldn't know what were their reasons. But from my understanding and finding is the fact that Mvelingangi would be Mvelingangi wa okoko betu obani 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 obani. Which means God Almighty of such and such individuals, which means you'll mention your own lineage where you come from, right? Which was a way of saying, I'm talking to the one who was also being invoked by my forefathers. Which means that it's not God of anyone else except the one who has always been God to my entire family. You understand? But once you remove the name now, or the term, then what you're left with is their names, without the main one who's being addressed. And that is how we get this infestation of having intermediaries now. That is where now this new custom of addressing God came about, among other customs. But what I'm trying to highlight is the fact that if you do introduce this concept to an African person, trust me, you won't have any difficulty. Because they know it has been taught. It has been there throughout history. Until the books were introduced, it has always been there. Right? I'll give you some few terms as well that are used by other tribes as well. Like the Xhosas, they call God Bamata. Right? In Sotho, they say Tatamacholo. This is only a variation through language. And each one of them knew that this is just a variation through language. Now we're facing a difficulty when we're telling people about Allah. They're like, okay, which God are you talking about? You understand? Because there has always been these many concepts now that are being introduced, which means that our approach has to be in line with what our people have already believed and what they've already understood. Because you are not talking to someone who doesn't know who God is. He may lose the concept of God down the line in some sense or another, but the spark of knowing that God exists and that He is there and He is responsible for everything is there already. Which means your approach as well as an individual will be very crucial and important in how you introduce who Allah is. And that is why we have to do these kind of works whereby we show the similitudes between Islam and African traditions. Because I always say, among other nations that have deviated from God so much, we are fortunate that some of us, we never went that far. Which means that we never even made pictures of God. We never carved any images of God. Among our people, we do not see any carving of God because He was always known as one you can never see. You can never perceive with the eye. You can never sleep and listen and hear Him speak. But you will see around you the effect of what He does. That is why when they would plant with the hope that He is the one who's going to send His rain. And I'll also show you or tell you how the tradition of asking for rain used to basically go down, or in what sense or another. And we find that Allah is defined in the very same sense, that He created everything, and He is the one who is the originator of everything, and He has always been there. There wasn't a time where He wasn't there, which means that this is something that is very much common among Muslims alike and our African brothers and sisters.
I would like to assure this concept because according to our journeys to West Africa, we don't say Allah, we ask them, who created us? They say Mao. Who is saves us? Mao. With this universe, who created is Mao? Then I said, oh, you and I, we believe the same
thing.
Mao.
Alhamdulillah.
By this way we have common language.
Alhamdulillah, appreciate that. So as I was saying, among the deductions that I've made was the main fact that if these people have one term, all of them, as many, mind you, the Zulu nation alone is very big. If you look at KZN alone in the map, in the South African map, it's very big. South African map, it's very big. If you look at Swaziland, it's very big. Which means that if it was a device of some person's thinking and his philosophy to come with this term, it wouldn't survive much. Mind you, there wasn't much communication at the time. Which means that even if he would think of how to name God, he would only maybe have it among his family and that's it. It would end there. Some people will say, no, we have our own way of calling Him. But we find that each and every person from these two tribes, the Zulus and the Swatis, they call God the Z same way. Which means someone was responsible for that. And as a Muslim, I got to understand that our people did receive a prophet. And this is what basically I would love to also share and show you among the things that were there. The Zulu tradition, as you have separation between men and women, you have teachings of modesty. There is a term in Zulu, or there's a saying which says that intombi ihlala ngentombi, insizwa ihlala ngensizwa, which means that a male person sits in respect of being a male person, which means that he has to be a modest male person, which means that he basically mingles among his kind, which is the males. And it says that a young lady or a lady has to also assume her position as a lady among ladies. I know I've been getting, this morning I got a recording, a voice note, where someone was asking, why do Muslims pray separately with women, or do even women pray in the mosque? And I had to reply to that, to actually highlight and explain why is it like that. And what is amazing enough is the fact that this is not a strange concept among our people. It has always been there. As you can see, the lady on your left, alhamdulillah, she's wearing in a traditional way, which is called ukvunula. Ukvunula basically means you're going all out, beautifying yourself and doing everything, but much of beauty is recognized through modesty. And we find that this was a concept of our people. This is the Isintu kind of way of doing things. Yet again, Islam as well emphasizes the very same thing. Which is why for me it confirms that Islam has always been there. It didn't start through Muhammad, peace be upon him. It started before, from time immemorial, because everything that is submissive to Allah is Muslim. And we see that our people, for some reasons or another, they have always been in the right path, in some sense or another, with the knowledge that they had. And which is why I believe some of them, alhamdulillah, we'll see them in Jannah, because they did follow the path that was trotted by the Prophet who was sent unto them or unto us as Zulus and other nations as well. We have a concept in Islam called zakah, and also sadaqah, right? Whereby you share from what you have. If you have excessive stuff, you share with your people. Our people have had this tradition for some time, whereby if, for instance, Uncle Sam travels, he comes to KwaZulu-Natal, he's not a local, he's not from around, then the chief of the area will be approached to give Sam a piece of land. Mind you, property wasn't a property that you own, because everything that was there was for everyone, because the term Ubuntu says, umuntu ngabantu, which means a person is himself through other people, which means you can't live by yourself. You need the whole entire community to be a part of, so that you can regard yourself as a human being. That is a concept of Ubuntu that has existed among our people for some great time. And that is why we are the first ones. We need to go back and remind our people of this concept, because it made life to be very easy. It made life to be free and sharing without this greed now that if I have it, everyone mustn't have, so that I can feel superior and supreme. So what would happen is, if Uncle Sam, for instance, visits the area or he wants to base himself, then the chief will assign a piece of land, say that piece of land, put whatever, that will show this is your territory now. Your neighbor, whoever you're building your house or you're living or your place of living next to, will start giving you life